your company should always be exit ready because that means that you're financially very viable and desirable to buyers.
This episode is sponsored by TherapyNotes, TherapyNotes.com. Be sure and check them out and be sure and use the promo code Gordon, Gordon, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. For the past 20 plus years, I've been working in the mental health field as a licensed therapist, private practice owner, coach, and consultant. And I've learned a lot the hard way, and I don't think you need to do the same. Hi there, I'm Gordon Brewer, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. Whether you're just starting out, expanding your practice, or looking for fresh inspiration, this podcast is here to support you in your journey. Each week, we explore the real-world challenges and opportunities that come with building and growing your private practice. From marketing and money management to ethics, client care, and self-care, we cover it all. You'll hear from leading experts, seasoned clinicians, and innovative voices in the mental health and allied health fields, all sharing their insights and strategies to help you thrive in your practice. So let's jump in and get to today's episode of the Practice of Therapy podcast. And welcome to the podcast. This is episode number 410 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. I'm your host, Gordon Brewer, and so glad you joined me for this particular episode. I'm really happy to have back on the podcast Carla Titus. And Carla had been on the podcast a few episodes back. I believe it was last year at some point, and I'm sure we'll have links here to the other interview I did with her here in the show notes. But anyway, we're going to be talking about what it looks like to think about an exit plan for your practice. You know, it's not something we really think about. In one of the things about this podcast and a lot of the others that are good friends that are in this space around private practice building, we think about growing and don't really think about exiting as much. But one of the things about it is that if you're thinking about exiting your practice, you're actually building a very sustainable practice. And that's one of the things that Carla and I talk about, is that if you've got a profitable and sustainable practice, it's really set up well to be able to sell or exit when you're at that point. So I'm looking forward to you hearing from Carla in this particular episode. One of the things, too, that I've been saying a lot about here lately is doing some consulting with me. You know, one of the things that I've really been focusing on more here lately is just doing individual consulting with people. You know, I really enjoy doing that one-on-one work and being able to talk with people about their practices and all the different aspects of running your practice. So if you're interested in working with me, if you'll just go over to practiceoftherapy.com and click on the link there that says coaching and consulting, and you can find out more about how to work with me individually and the different ways in which I work with people in helping them grow or scale their practice, or even if you're just getting started out. I enjoy doing those things as well. I really enjoy working with people in those beginning stages. So be sure and check it out. And also, before we get to my conversation with Carla, I'd love for you to find out more about the Psychcraft network, which you're going to hear from one of the people that's part of that network, along with our sponsor of the podcast, TherapyNotes.
Hi, I'm Wendy Owens. If you don't know me, I am the person behind the Wise Practice podcast, which is part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. I am so proud to be a part of this network, along with my good friend Gordon Brewer, who's doing such amazing work on helping people on their practice journey. If you haven't discovered the Wise Practice podcast yet, you can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts. I'd love for you to join us as we explore how to grow a faith-based practice that brings you the income you need and the lifestyle you want. Be sure to check out the podcast and other helpful information at whitneyowens.com.
Hi, this is Rachel, Gordon's podcast assistant, and I want to share the platform Gordon trusts for his own practice, TherapyNotes. TherapyNotes is the highest rated EHR, practice management, and billing software for mental health professionals. It's an all-in-one system for scheduling, notes, billing, and secure client communication. And if you ever need help, their 24/7 customer service is always just a call or email away. Their latest update, Therapy Fuel, uses AI to streamline documentation, generating progress notes, creating contact notes from client messages, and even summarizing client history forms, saving therapists hours every week. Are you ready to give it a try? Head to therapynotes.com, click Start My Free Trial, and use the code GORDON to get your first 2 months free. See why TherapyNotes is the most trusted EHR and the one Gordon chooses for his practice. Please enjoy the rest of the show.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm really happy to have back on the podcast Carla Titus. Welcome, Carla.
Thanks for having me again. A pleasure to be here.
Yes, and so we're going to be covering, I think, a topic that's depending on where you are in your journey, but I think it's still something that you have to keep top of mind and when you go into private practice, and that's your exit plan. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But Carla, for folks that might not know you, tell them a little bit more about yourself and how you've landed where you've landed.
Yeah, so I actually had a career in corporate finance for 11 years, working for a Fortune 500 company before I started working with small businesses. And I'm really passionate about, building sustainable, profitable, long-term businesses and using finance as a tool and a means to do that, combined with business strategy and thinking about growth and opportunities for a practice to be able to continue to, fight the fight in the industry, despite all the things that come our way, and helping them really navigate and pivot as things, change in the industry to make sure that they stay in business so they can do more of the work that they do with, patients who need their support, as well as making sure the owners are rewarded for taking that risk and compensating themselves well, and ultimately having a goal of either exit or continue to own a business that's generating really well, manage profits, and they feel confident in their ability to manage their numbers and they're not, scared or feel like it's controlling them. And I know a lot of people, identify themselves as not numbers people, but I think once we show them ways that they can start to get in tune with their numbers and simplify it, it becomes a lot more attainable and more comfortable with the concepts the more we talk about them. And we just strive to be there for our clients and support them through that journey.
Right. Yeah. And that's the people that have been, people that have been listening to the podcast for a while hear that theme from me all the time about the importance of knowing your numbers and understanding the financial side of your practice, because without that, you're not going to be able to keep in practice, and you've got to be profitable, and you have to do that. And the only way you can do that is to pull back the curtain and look at the numbers and understand how all that works.
Yeah, and shift that mindset from just being a therapist to being an owner and a CEO of a company. And the CEO of a company knows their numbers. And if they don't, they ask for help, and then they get support where needed to make sure they better understand, what's happening. And what gets measured gets managed ultimately. So if you don't even know where to start and you want to make progress, you got to look at your starting points so you know whether or not you're making progress in the right way or not.
Right. Well, one of the things, and Carla and I were chatting a little bit about this before we started recording, and I started thinking about this kind of as an afterthought here, Carla, was just thinking about the changes in mental health care and private practice. Since I started into private practice, I was even prior to that, when I was working for an agency, there's a lot that has changed, just not only clinically, but just the way in which we do business. And when I first went into private practice, there were not as many people in private practice as there are now. And I think a big part of it is just because we never learned those skills, how to be a business owner, how to go into private practice and graduate school. I think it's starting to get a little better, and hearing a little bit about people learning more about the business side of running a practice. But even with that, and we kind of alluded to this as well, is that the industry has changed so much now with tech companies getting into it and big investors and that kind of thing. And I know you've thought a lot about that and been working with a lot of people just around, okay, if I were to pivot and maybe exit my practice, what would that look like? And there's probably a lot of listeners that might be thinking that.
Yeah, they tend to come to us thinking, okay, I'm ready to sell. And like maybe because I'm tired of it, or maybe because I'm finally ready to, get that big paycheck, that big payout. And maybe I haven't been paying myself this whole time waiting for this moment. And, they come to us, and like what we see a lot happening is you are competing with those big private equity firms who are acquiring a ton of practices that are small, gathering them up, changing compensation structures, paying people more, even though they're not necessarily making a profit, or if they are, it's not so big, but they don't care because ultimately they're going to flip that for, 10 times the value just because they have an aggregate, a conglomerate of small private practices in a different, in a certain area, regionally speaking. And so that's what you're competing with nowadays. You're also competing with technology. AI is coming into the field saying, I can be your therapist, whether or not that's good, right, bad, scary, all the things. Yes, people are, probably using it, whether it's good or bad for them. And you as the provider need to be aware of that, because that's what you're competing with. And that is a very different landscape than when people first started, in private practice, many like yourself, or even recently. And, you also have a lot of people telling anyone can be a good practice owner and like go for it. And it's fine and it's easy and it's simple, and build a team and pay all the things. And then you just collect the paycheck or the profits, right? And that is far from the truth. It's a lot of hard work in owning a private group practice to grow in it to what it be, to have it be profitable, because it takes a lot of intentionality and a lot of planning and strategy together. And, compound that with like the feeling of owners are tired, they're working really hard, things are not going their way. You have cyber attacks, you have COVID, you have things that you just like never could plan for. Not even in my wildest dreams as a CFO would have thought of a scenario where we had those kind of things come our way. And people are still recovering. Some practices didn't make it. And there's just a lot more competition in the marketplace. So people have choices, and they're going to choose who they're going to go to for many different reasons. So it's really important that practices think about how are they differentiating themselves? What are they doing that other practices cannot do? How are they showing up and marketing their services to meet the needs of the clients? Because we know people still want to do business with people, right? You still want to talk to people as much as technology and other things are out there. And then when it comes to being exit ready, your company should always be exit ready, because that means that you're financially very viable and desirable to buyers. And this is something we really focus on with clients, regardless of if they're ready to sell or not. Exit ready is always on our to-do list, because if we're doing our job right, we should be able to take an offer anytime it comes. Always, thinking through the lens, is this the right person to sell to or company to sell to? Because that's really important to a lot of my owners. They're like, I don't want to sell into private equity. I don't want someone to take this over and not run it the way I want it, with my values, or for my community to service the community at large. And it's important that that alignment is there as well when it comes to planning for exit readiness, and also deciding if you're going to take an offer from another company.
Right. Yeah. And I know too, just in talking with a lot of other practice owners, when they're thinking about selling their practice, a big concern that comes up is just making sure their people, their employees, are taken care of, and that they're not going to suffer from the change and the move and that kind of thing. And so I know that's a real important piece for a lot of people.
Yeah, that comes with that alignment, right? To make sure your employees will have a job at the end of it all, and not necessarily with a guarantee, but at least that they know that they will be cared for, and that they will have a good compensation package and benefits, and that you will carry on maybe some of the values and the culture, that you created, because that's why people wanted to work here, and you want to preserve that as much as possible, while still, realizing it is a new owner and they can bring their own flavor to it. It might be a little different. They also might have more resources. They might be able to afford better things for your employees. So it's also an advantage to consider, when the time is right and the buyer is right. what that could look like for your employees is an opportunity for growth, for development, for, again, more pay, things that maybe you couldn't afford to do before. They get to do that for them. So how amazing would that be as well as an outcome?
Right, right. So, yeah. So, as you think about it, Carla, being in the financial world, what are the things we need to be thinking about in terms of an exit plan? I know one thing you mentioned is that, and this goes across the board, is always to be profitable and making sure that you're not struggling financially with your practice.
Yeah, it definitely starts with profit because at the end of the day, the valuation is some multiple of profit. For any businesses that is seven figures or bigger than that, there's other ways to value below that seven-figure mark. But for the most part, if you're considering selling and you're at that point, your profit's going to dictate the value. The other things that dictate the value are also how much the owner is compensated. Like, what is the role of the owner in the business? And I see this often. There's a lot of owner dependency happening, and owners want to sell their practice, but it's really more like a job. Like, they're still seeing clients, they're still doing everything. They have three roles in the company. And when this company approaches them to purchase them, they don't want to buy a job. They want a fully functioning running company with a leadership team included. And so a lot of the work we do is sometimes we have to build a leadership team that wasn't there before. Sometimes we have to make investments in roles and positions that didn't exist before. We also have to look at, the space we have. We have to look at the people we have. Are they performing, like the caseload numbers? Are they hitting those goals? Are they behind? And really start to fine tune all the moving pieces along with, cost structure, compensation structure. Sometimes we have to touch some of that as well to ensure the profitability is there, because without it, we can't really have the impact anyway. So we want to start with profit because we want to have the impact, right? We want to be here long term. So we have to have the profit to support it. And then when it comes to exit ready, we want to be planning a couple of years ahead. We don't want to be saying like, I want to exit tomorrow. And if you've been doing financially well and things are fantastic, there might be a great opportunity for you to exit, soon. But often we do see it as a 2-year roadmap because we have to put all these things into place that we're just not there. Got to clean house, do a little house cleaning before we go put it up in the market, just like you do for getting ready to sell your own home as a property. You probably put paint on the walls. You probably put new floors or things that you were like, I've been procrastinating on that. And now it's time because I want to show it the best way I possibly can so I can get the most value for it. It's no different in a business.
Right, right. Yeah. So what are some, again, just to break it down maybe a little smaller, what are the different components of being exit ready as you think about it?
Yeah. So you have to have really tight controls on like overall rent and payroll. Those are your biggest costs in the practice, right? So I know a lot of people focus on like the smaller items and they want to nickel and dime their way to savings. And there's those two levers on like the cost side. And then there is the one lever, which is growth, revenue growth. Like, can you make your practice be a different size? And therefore there will be more room for profit. Your profit percentage might not change, but the absolute dollars are larger, right? As a percentage of a higher base. So we all start talking about, okay, what's the growth strategy? How are we growing? Is it different types of services? Is it the same kind of services where we'll just double down? Is there an add-on service, meta management, assessments, groups, whatever it is that you're not already doing that we should be considering adding now, not waiting for the new buyer to add that in, but really adding that value now to grow the top line. And I'm very big on, let's just grow the top line because that feels a little bit easier than trying to nickel and dime our way to savings. Sometimes we made decisions around rent and things we can't get out of 5-year leases. If we already signed it, we're kind of stuck. So, but if we get the top line higher, now as a percentage of, rent as a percentage of top line becomes a lot more manageable. So you can make a lot of the numbers look way better if you have a top line growth. Of course, it comes with cost on payroll and, other areas as well, maybe marketing because you're trying to grow the firm and such, but those will level out over time. So it's just being intentional about that planning and those moving pieces. Everything else probably doesn't really move the needle in your practice as much as some of those categories I spoke about.
Right, right. Really going after the low-hanging fruit of either adding clinicians or looking at your pricing structure and that sort of thing.
Yeah, getting insurance increases or doing a private pay increase is going to be critical because that, times many, many claims, it can make a huge difference in your margins and profit. Also making sure like your billing is keeping up with things. Sometimes I see large sums of outstanding balances that could be collected that makes your revenue number look better if you can get that cash in the door sooner, if you're not, accrual basis, if you're cash basis. So these are things that we could start working through to be very intentional, and thinking about your current contracts, right? Employees, you keeping them happy? Are you retaining them? This is part of the valuation too. We want to see the employees go with the new buyer. So we want to make sure that they are compensated well, that they're treated well, that they feel like they have a place here and they want to stay long term, because those are going to increase your odds of, getting top dollar for your firm. So those are things we're going to be thinking about and working through a plan to make sure that we're hitting the mark in those areas.
Right.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Bob's Discount Furniture is kicking off the holiday season by unboxing top-rated pieces for every room and must-have gifts for your whole list at incredible values every week. So stop into your nearest store, shop online at mybobs.com, and check back every week to save big. Oh, my Bob.
You mentioned something that some people might not quite be as familiar with, but that is profit margin. And so you want to maybe say a little more about profit margin and what is a good kind of number to shoot for?
Yeah. So I would say in general, what we aim to do as far as profit percentage for our practices is between 5 and 20%. And I know that might not sound like a huge percentage number, but do the math. If that's like a $5 million business or a $10 million business, it really starts to add up, right? On absolute dollars. This is after the owner's already gotten a paycheck, and then now they're, drawing from the profits and then investing back in the growth of the practice. So it is a lot of money. So we want to keep that as consistent or grow it over time. So if we're at 5%, we're aiming to grow it to 10 to 15 to 20% is our goal, right? Without doing anything unnatural. There's sometimes a lot of undoing we need to do when we come into a practice to work with them. It's maybe they just didn't have the right compensation structure. So we need to start working to shift that over time. And it takes time. It's not going to happen tomorrow. So that's why we say 2-year runway to get exit rate, because there's a lot of things we need to change. And then there's the profit margin. That's the bottom line. That's everyone's paid. Everything is paid. What is left behind, essentially, right? And you do it as a percentage of revenue. And then there's this item at the top, which is gross margin. And this one is the one that we have a little bit more control over. So I'll get into that a little more, which is your clinicians and their compensation. Like once you compensate them, what's left behind to work with before you start to pay your overhead expenses like rent, marketing, admin, contractors, employees, anyone else that supports the operations of the business. And that is really important to also keep healthy. We check for every single employee in the company to see how they are performing. And this goes back to caseloads. This goes back to retention. This goes back to, a number of session counts, making sure that they are performing to those goals consistently, even when they're taking time off, because we check in maybe quarterly, but we're managing them monthly. So there's ways that we can improve our gross margin that then filters down all the way to the bottom line of the business. But if you're not even paying attention to those numbers, it's going to be really hard to know who are my top performers, who are not, who need a little bit of coaching and help to get a little bit better at their, gross margins, so we can get better margins overall for the practice.
Right. So as a person thinks about maybe selling their practice, you want to outline maybe kind of the steps about that. In addition to getting your practice ready, you want it to, the way I like to say it is you want it to run like a well-oiled machine and also have as little owner, not participation, but the revenue coming into the practice isn't all hinging on what the owner produces, right? And so there's not to get too far off on a tangent. You might be familiar with this book, Carla. It's called Clockwork by Mike Michalowicz. Yeah. And he talks about that, just being able to, okay, how do you want to not have a job for yourself so that your company self-sustains, your practice is self-sustaining. But anyway, I don't want to get too far off there, but what are maybe the steps of selling a practice?
Well, it starts with awareness in your numbers, right? You want to know, okay, what's my starting point? Like, it might be better than you thought, by the way. So I always tell people, just go check.
Right.
And then, and maybe if you're like just in the early stage of like solo plus maybe a few clinicians, your numbers are going to look radically different. So I just want to encourage you to think, okay, what does that growth look like? And maybe it's, yeah, this is a starting point and I still see clients 50% of my time. How do I get that reduced over time? By hiring more to shift the workload off my plate as an owner into, some of my clinicians doing the work for me. Because again, that frees you up to grow the practice, to do other things, to, get it exit ready and such. And also it increases the value overall. I would say first, I would start with an expense audit. Sometimes we just work so hard for our money and we just give it away. And I'm like, what are you paying for that you don't need, you're not using, or maybe you thought was a good investment but didn't return an investment? And you can change your mind and you can cancel that and you can stop paying for some things. Of course, if there's contracts, we want to honor them, but just know maybe I won't renew that. And looking at expense audit is such a straightforward, there's no judgment. You just go look at your expenses. What are you spending money on today? Is that still in line with what we need to be spending for the future growth of our practice? And things change, right? So we want to be assessing that. So step one, you can do that yourself, right? You don't need any help. Just pull up your P&L and start looking at expenses. What's happening there? Then I want you to think about, what is my plan for next year? How am I growing my practice intentionally? Because a lot of you are waiting until January 1st, and then you're freaking out that you don't have a plan for the next year, right? It's not late, but ideally you're walking into the new year with a plan on hand, ready to go, so that you're not guessing your way through 26 or the next year to come. You're really figuring out, okay, here's what I'm going to do each quarter to help the growth of my practice. And what are opportunities you can unlock? And this is where, if you don't know how to do this or haven't done it before, it's a muscle you got to exercise. So you got to start small. Just think about some opportunities, talk to some friends, maybe get some professional help if needed, to figure out what is your plan and start forecasting out what might your goals be for the next year. Because when we intentionally plan, we're more likely to hit those goals. And then third, you need to assess, where are you financially? Like, what's your current financial health? And is that going to change going into the next year to improve and, again, make progress towards some of the goals that we shared today on where your profitability should be? And again, by growing, you'll get better odds of achieving that. So those are the first three things you could start doing now to start getting exit ready. And then the fourth will be obviously owner dependency, which you spoke to, right, Gordon, where you're maybe not the one seeing clients anymore. And like, how does that shift over time? And I would say practices go through waves, and sometimes the owner does have to step back in to see clients to just get the revenue where it needs to before we get all the clinicians hired that we need to. Or, we went through a rough patch where we're spending too much. And that happens. The goal is just to, over time, get less and less owner dependent for the business to run and produce, revenue and profits. Ideally, that's the end stage we want to get to. And we just want to make progress every year towards that.
Right. Another option maybe you could speak to, and I think everybody has to kind of weigh this. I've got a friend of mine that's a veterinarian, and so this is something, kind of similar service industry. But what he had a fairly large practice, and he's sold to a private investors. And so his practice is actually owned by this other company, but he still works in his clinic as a provider and gets compensated, I'm sure, very well. And also his retirement's all there and everything, but he's not having to worry about the capital and the numbers as much. You want to speak to a scenario like that?
Yeah, I do, because I think there's a lot of owners out there that like underestimate the power of not having to own the thing anymore. And getting bought out of their business, but still working in the thing that they love to do, which is maybe being a therapist again. And if there's that passion, fantastic. What the PE firms are looking for is someone to run the business. They don't want to take it over and then have to run it themselves. They want to put an operator in place. And if that operator can be you, because they hire you on a contract basis as an employee of now no longer your firm, but you sold it to them, you got the payout, you got the cash out, okay? And now they want to give you a paycheck to stay on and continue to run it. Now, you might not be the boss anymore. You still got to obey by, like the larger firm desires and needs. You might still have goals to meet, but you're no longer responsible for bringing in business. You're no longer responsible if something breaks, if employees have issues, they have an HR department they can go to. Like, it just shifts the dynamics to like, I not just have a job again, but I got that big payday and I'm really happy. And I'm a very happy employee right now.
Right.
And that my retirement's getting funded all of a sudden, right? Because maybe you didn't for so many years of building the firm. You just pour everything back in and there was never enough money for you to take care of yourself fully, except maybe a paycheck. And all of a sudden you're just shifting to like being an employee again. And, you know, some people might hate that idea, right? Like, I don't like to be told what to do. And some people might be like, that actually sounds very cushy. And I might actually want that payday and have the ongoing know that you have a job, but you don't have to keep it maybe because you got enough of a payday that you can choose to work, but you don't have to. That's the ideal scenario, right? Because then you could just walk away if you don't like it a year later or two. And sometimes they have contract terms where you have to be a minimum of so much time. You know, you have to agree to that, of course, in good faith. But yeah, I've seen that happen. It is an option. Not always, right? You could ask for it, they could offer it. It just depends if that works for the firm buying it.
Right. Sure. And also it can be set up so that position that you move into is time limited. So which is part of the deal in buying the practice. You know, you continue to work and manage the practice and that sort of thing. They compensate you for it, but there's an end to it as well that's set up in the contract. So, I mean, those are things to consider as well.
Yeah, there's also an in-between on the two, Gordon, where like you just get the payday and you walk away and you're just happily ever after, right? There's that you get to consult for them for a period of time too. You don't have to be an employee. You just say, here's my hourly fee. I will consult for you for 6 months. We agree to a minimum of hours and I'm just available. And you're kind of like part-time working in your own terms still, right? So you're still the boss of your consulting firm now. That is helping with the business success because they want to see it succeed. So they're like, hey, I get access to the past owner to like ask questions and get support when things don't go right, but you're also not responsible for the day-to-day. That might be a good compromise for you to consider, right? Until you find like what's next for you. Because the other thing we never talk about, Gordon, is what happens after you get that big payday. I see a lot of owners get that big payday and then they go away, they enjoy 2 weeks off and then they're bored or they get depressed. Because they're like, my identity for so long was to build this business. And then they go start another business. That's the typical one that happens, right? Like they're like itching to start. I'm like, but you already had the business. So why did you sell in the first place? So it's just like a whole thing where I always tell my owners, what is your plan after exit? Like, what would your ideal week look like? What do you have hobbies? Do you have friends? Do you have other things outside of work? Because that has been their life for so long that it's hard for them to envision what the aftermath could look like. So I make them go do some homework before we decide if we're going to sell to make sure that that is the right thing for them. Instead, they just can keep the business and keep running it profitably if that doesn't fit their, desires.
And I'll add here to also consult with an accounting or tax person to figure out the tax consequences, because if you get a big landfall of cash coming to you as income, guess what? You've got to pay taxes on that. So you want to look at what is going to be your strategy around that and how to navigate all of that.
Yeah, I had a friend that sold their practice for a lot of money. And the first call they made, well, I guess the second, the lawyer was the first. The accountant was the second because they specialize in tax ways to like figure out the tax side of it to not have to pay so much, legally in the way that it gets framed as the deal goes. So it's really important that you have those professionals, on call, ready to go when this happens. And don't wait until then. Like, go start networking now your way to who your tax accountant will be for exit, planning, so that you have those people ready to go and can consult, because they can save you a big chunk of, and it might cost you, by the way, they're not cheap, but the savings you get from it are far outweigh the initial investment you'll make with them. So yes, that is such a great point.
Right. And that's not to get us too far in the weeds, but knowing the difference between an asset sale and a stock sale and all of those kinds of things that can involve the taxes. So, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And it goes to the entity structure and like the type of, a purchase agreement you have. And you definitely want a lawyer by your side that's done this before, and an accountant who can help you avoid the taxes on both of that to make sure they're guiding you through that process.
Sure. Well, Carla, I've got to be respectful of your time and our time. And I know we could talk about this forever, but tell folks how they can get in touch with you and if they want to find out more about what you do and how they can get help with any of these things.
Yeah, we would love to have you follow us since you're here on the podcast. We also have a podcast. It's called CEO Financial Clarity Corner. And we are just getting started. We're really excited to share a lot of this free educational content. We want you all to get better at managing money and start to make sense of it by giving you that education you never got from, money school that maybe you didn't go to for through the podcast. So make sure you follow us there, rate and review, leave us comments. And then if you're more of a reader, sign up for our newsletter on our website, wealthworthwithin.com. We always put in really great content, also let you know when we release a new episode on the podcast. And we're also on social media, Wealth Worth Within, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. And then if you are ready to hire a fractional CFO, or maybe you've been working with a very expensive bookkeeper that said they could be your CFO and that hasn't been working for you, make sure you reach out and set up a call with us on our website and let's get started section. And we would love to talk to you about your support needs and how we might be able to meet them as a fractional CFO.
Awesome. And again, we'll have links in the show summary and the show notes for this. And also go back and listen to the other episode that Carla was on for this podcast. That was episode number 322. I looked it up right before we got on the call here today on this recording this episode. So thanks again, Carla, for being on the podcast. And I'm sure we'll be in touch again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, again, a big thanks to Carla for joining me again on the podcast. And be sure and check out her things. Again, you'll find links here in the show notes and the show summary. And I hope that this has been helpful for you in thinking about just beginning with the end in mind, so to speak, and just thinking about what could be your exit plan when you get to that point. And again, check out Carla's things. And her website is wealthworthwithin.com. And again, there'll be links here in the show notes and the show summary. And also, I'd love for you to check out our sponsor of the podcast, TherapyNotes. They are the leading electronic health record system for mental health providers. They're who I use in my practice. And I'm constantly impressed with all the things that they do to improve their product and improve their platform. It really is an all-in-one platform where you can do everything that you need to do to run your practice, particularly on the clinical side of things in terms of scheduling appointments with clients, your documentation, your billing, and all of those things can all be handled in one place. So be sure and check them out. Go to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes and be sure and use that promo code just Gordon, Gordon, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. So hope you're having a good holiday season. I know we're full force into it, and hope that you're having a great year as we kind of begin to close it out and come back for some more episodes. We've got a lot of great guests lined up, and I'm looking forward to this next year and a whole lot of great things to happen in this coming year. So take care, folks, and we'll be back with you again for another episode of the Practice of Therapy podcast. And do take time to follow us or subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it, and tell your friends about it too. You have been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. And if you haven't done so already, please sign up to receive the free Private Practice Startup Guide at practiceoftherapy.com. And to find more great podcasts like this one, please visit the Psychcraft Network at psychcraftnetwork.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host guests or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. And if you need help in these areas, be sure to find the right professional to help you with these things.
Life is full of big deals. Starting a family, buying a house, and if it's a big deal for you, it's a big deal to us at 4Leaf Federal Credit Union. Get support from our knowledgeable and friendly team and feel ready to take on the big moments in your life. Learn more at 4leaffcu.com. 4Leaf Federal Credit Union. Let's money together. Federally insured by NCUA Equal Housing Lender.